decent and honorary and noble and fine and great. We have the whole spectrum of the very worst to the very best things. That's what we see, this spectrum of human behavior. And the question comes up is, why are some of these traits treated as derivative and secondary, while others are treated as basic? You look at the spectrum and you say, well, those are just all environmentally caused, and this one, 6, 11, 38, and 52, that's real human nature, you see. And by the way, people on both sides of the political spectrum do that. You know, we pick our own side and say, this is what we hope people really are. Second, the argument from human nature is an argument of drive theory. It postulates innate drives, innate tendencies. But again, I mean, aside from the obviously basic survival tendencies of food, shelter, clothing, and such, and the need for productive labor to do those things, which, by the way, Marx and Engels saw great significance in as to what that meant for history and the development of human society. That would be another lecture, though. We can only conjecture about innate drives. You see, the thing about an innate drive is, again, no one's ever seen it. It's unscientific. It's post hoc ergo propter hoc, if you will. The thing you're supposed to explain is then taken as evidence of the thing you're supposed to be explaining. You claim, for instance, to explain why people pursue money and power. I have an explanation. What is it, Joe? The explanation is they have a drive for money and power. And what is your proof? People pursue money and power. So the thing you're attempting to explain is used as its own proof. Post hoc ergo propter hoc. Write that down. Third, much human nature ideology is sustained only by reductionist thinking, by ignoring the very complex social processes that intervene between innate proclivity and actual behavior. For instance, to say that war is an innate human drive is to overlook the fact, one, that wars are products of complex social organizations and interests, of objective necessities sometimes, or of the ambitions of leaders, whatever else. Two, it overlooks the fact that most military personnel are drafted or coerced into the ranks by press gangs or conscription. If war was such a natural tendency, then why do you have to draft us? Why do people go to Canada? Why do people refuse to go? Why do people go only out of threat that they might have to face 5 years in prison? Finally, if war were a natural state, part of our nature is such, whatever that means, then people would feel at ease and comforted by it. But they're greatly discomforted, and they experience it as a horror, with the few exceptions who might get off on it. And those few exceptions are usually people who experience it in very optimal conditions. They're fighting, killing others with superior firepower, or they're in a big jet, or whatever else. Barrows Dunham, I think, makes that point very well. Happiness is a good test of what conditions are in harmony with human nature, and by that test, war must seem to be unnatural indeed. And if war is in all our natures, why are some people not at war? Why do most people don't want war? Why are there whole nations that change their behavior? An imperialistic nation like Sweden, which for centuries exercised warlike imperialist control over Finland, over Norway, and such, and elsewhere. But in the last century, Sweden has been one of the most peaceful, one of the most decent countries on the globe. Neutral, peaceful, peace-like Switzerland. Now, you must have the same gene pools in Sweden and Switzerland as just about everywhere else. You must have the same males with all those same glandular juices and whatever else, and yet they're not having it. They got not going to war. Well, it's said patriarchy causes war. Again, another biologically deterministic view that has currency today. Men make war, not women. Again, I'd say that's reductionist. Some men, at the expense of everyone else, including a lot of other men, make war. Women don't make war because they've been denied access to state power and to tribal leadership. When they have had power, they made war. From Cleopatra to Catherine the Great to Elizabeth I to Golda Meir to Indira Gandhi to Margaret Thatcher, they made war. They made war because they were operating with a male mentality and in a male mental set. Exactly. So it's what's between your ears and not what's between your loins that is the determining factor of your behavior. Human nature is so misused as an argument, and all the examples I've just given you, that it's led a lot of people on the left, progressive, reformist, revolutionary, whatever persuasion, to conclude that there's no such thing as human nature. Now that too, it has problems of its own. It's a kind of, it seems to be an untenable position. It's a hyper-environmentalism. It's all nurture, no nature. But after all, what is being nurtured when you talk about nurture? Even if we were to say that human beings have a vastly greater capacity to shape their social environment than animals do, we must allow that there's something there that's being shaped. Are we really just clay that can be impressed in any manner? Okay, maybe we are. But even clay has a nature. If it's stretched too far, it breaks. It cracks when it's dry. It hardens with heat. It has other properties and imperatives that make it recognizable. All things, all entities have a nature. To say human beings don't have a nature is to say they're the only thing in the world that doesn't have a nature. Well, I've talked mostly about how not to think of human nature and politics. Now, how to think about it, well, that's going to take another whole talk. I would believe, Marx believed there was a human nature. He talked about species being. He talked about the unique human quality of productive labor. He talked about how human beings create a history and how that becomes a force in itself. And we must understand that it's in the nature of people to be more problematic than our theories of society or social betterment might want them to be. That people's self-interest must be respected in some way. And yet we've got to understand and try to struggle with why people define their self-interest in this way rather than in that way. That becomes a job of social investigation rather than proclamations about human nature. That self-interest can be defined in different ways and according to class interests. We've got to be aware of that. We've got to be aware that people also are capable of noble, gallant, courageous, and generous behavior. But they're also capable of vicious, mean-spirited, murderously egocentric behavior also. I think they are. And I think that all those, given certain circumstances, all those things can be treated as innate tendencies and proclivities. My view of human nature is not a very glowing one myself. I believe, along with the great American theologian, I know you've heard me say this before, some of you, the great American theologian Woody Allen, who said that maybe God exists, but he's an underachiever. I mean, it's a botched job. Imagine being omnipotent and producing this. Earthquakes, plagues, tornadoes, and human beings, the way with all the capacities to do the good but also the very evil things they do. It's a botched job. I mean, if I were omnipotent, I could have done a much better job. I'm not omnipotent, and I think I could do a better job. I tell you one thing, I'd take more than 6 days to do it. I have no illusions, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I have no illusions about human beings. If you read history, you come away impressed by the treachery, the murder, the slaughter, the corruption, the deception, the horror, the injustice, the oppression of it all. Well then, it's about time you said that, Parenti. Then aren't the conservatives right? People are no damn good. No, the conservatives are wrong. Because if you read history, you also encounter courage, sacrifice, honor, decency, the struggle for collective betterment. The struggle for collective betterment, Marx believed, was the motive force of history. He called that class struggle. And the thing about conservatives is they don't see the potential for collective human development. And have always denied it out of fear that it would lead to a loss of their artificial advantages and privileges. And it's because people have the capacity to act so poorly at times. It's for that very reason that we must all the more pursue and advocate equality and democracy. It's because the evil doing is so preponderantly the product of those who have power and wealth. Not all evil doing, but most of it is that we need restraints upon them, and we need to eliminate them as a class power. Not as people, but eliminate them as a class power. You know, the Founding Fathers were very concerned about the abuse of power, but their concern, the delegates who met in Philadelphia in 1787 to write the Constitution, their concern was with the power of the people, the masses. And they said it was a dangerous thing, and they had a name for it. They had the same name for it that Plato and Socrates had. They called it democracy. And they called it leveling. And they said that was the danger, that was the abuse. And yet this is the source of our power and legitimacy. So how do we set up a republican form of government without the excesses of leveling and democracy coming in? And that was what they consciously looked and worked for. They talked about it. If you say they did it today, you're called a conspiracy theorist. But if you read what they said, that's what they said. And they were preoccupied by it. And James Madison, in his great essay, The Federalist Paper number 10, says exactly that. And he goes on, he says something else. That the people need to be checked. The people have to be watched. The people have to be distrusted. He didn't call them people, he called them the majority faction. Men of substance and property, however, did not need such checks. Men of substance, men of the better classes, needed no such check because they had an investment in the commonwealth, and they would therefore not jeopardize that commonwealth. Oh, yes, they would, James Madison, and they do it for the sake of their investments. And that's what the Founding Fathers didn't know. The Founding Fathers and the conservatives, the plutocrats and aristocrats, the reactionaries and the monarchists, the servants of class power and class science, the servants of concentrated wealth, they are the naive ones, a very self-serving naivete. They're really not as stupid as they pretend to be, nor as stupid as they expect us to be. We cannot afford their theories, no more than we can afford their practice. So never worry about how the nation needs stable institutions. This nation needs changing institutions and creative institutions. That's what it needs. Never worry about how our country needs a successful presidency. All through Iran-Contra, we now find out they even covered up. They didn't want to bring Reagan down when they could have, because it wouldn't be good for the nation. We needed a successful president. A successful in what? Eliminating the progressive income tax, in cutting women's infant children programs, in cutting human services to the people most in need, in pursuing a murderous war in El Salvador and Nicaragua. Successful? That's what the successful president. We don't need to worry about that. We need to worry about how the nation needs an honest, democratic president. And never worry about how we need strong leadership and a strong military and strong defenses. We desperately need a clean environment and decent transportation and affordable housing and a whole other list of things. The nation needs the will of its people. It needs the interests of its people. It needs the labor and concerns of its people. The nation needs sanity and a vigorous move away from the extremism and the insanity and the deceit and the conspiratorial hypocrisy that now rules. The nation needs democracy, and we don't have it, not enough of it, and we aim to get it. That's our human nature, or that's in the nature of our humanity, a yearning